What makes a movie from 1997 still resonate with audiences today?
Hmm.
That's what we're going to try to figure out today as we take a deep dive into the enduring power of Titanic.
Hmm.
And wow, you've given us a ton of material to go through.
It really is amazing how this film, even decades later, it still sparks debate. Is it like the ultimate romance, or is it this dazzling spectacle of filmmaking? I think as we dig into this stuff, we're going to see that it might actually be both,
Oh,
and maybe even more than that.
let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
So the first thing that jumps out from the stuff you sent over
Yeah.
is that love story, Jack and Rose.
Yeah.
It's like such a classic trope. The star-crossed lovers,
Right.
echoing stories as old as time. Really, I mean Romeo and Juliet, right?
Absolutely.
You've got Jack, this free-spirited artist stuck in steerage, and then there's Rose, who is well, she's trapped by what society expects of her, and she's in this awful engagement. It's like they were destined to find each other in a way.
Yeah, and that's really where the power of a story like this lies, right? The source material actually draws a direct comparison to Romeo and Juliet, which is interesting because it's that knowledge, that sense of impending doom right from the start that makes every single interaction between these two characters so much more powerful. Because you know it can't end well,
Right.
which for some reason just makes that, that very limited time they have together that much more meaningful.
And that ending, I'm not going to spoil it for the handful of people who haven't seen Titanic.
Yeah.
But man, Jack's sacrifice and then Rose promising never to let go.
Yeah.
Those images, those moments, they're like burned into our minds. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And they stay with you. But is that it? Is Titanic just this like purely tragic romance? I'm not so sure. And some of the stuff you sent over, it suggests that there's a lot more to discover. Starting with, well, the amazing way this whole thing was made, how they actually put it up on the screen.
The source material really emphasizes how groundbreaking the filmmaking was for Titanic. This wasn't some simple love story shot on a soundstage. James Cameron dove headfirst into making a spectacle.
And that's where it gets really fascinating. The source material talks about how Titanic pushed the boundaries of what was possible with special effects in the late 90s. This wasn't just CGI, though there was some groundbreaking early CGI work, especially those shots of the ship's interior collapsing as it went down. But it was also miniatures and practical effects all working together to create this incredible experience. It really changed how disaster films were made from that point on.
Thinking about it now, I can't remember another film from that time that looked quite like Titanic.
That was exactly Cameron's goal. He wasn't content to just depict the sinking of the Titanic. He wanted the audience right there, experiencing the terror and chaos of it all as realistically as possible.
And he succeeded. Even knowing what's coming, I still get chills watching those scenes.
And that's what makes it more than just spectacle. The source material argues that the sinking feels incredibly real because of all the effort that went into it, from recreating the ship to the smallest details. It makes the fictional story even more powerful.
And that's where things get really interesting. The film blends real historical events with the fictional story of Jack and Rose. We've got actual historical figures like Captain Smith. Even the design of the ship was meticulously researched.
It's a balancing act that the film pulls off incredibly well. It doesn't just show you the past, it immerses you in it. It utilizes the tragedy of the Titanic as a backdrop, but tells a very personal story against it.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure. And the source material does mention some creative liberties were taken, like playing up the class dynamics for dramatic effect.
That's a really important point, and it raises questions about how we tell stories with historical events. Does this detract from the power of the film? Or does it enhance it? Is it ethical to take liberties with history to serve a fictional narrative? These are questions that filmmakers and even documentary makers struggle with all the time.
So we've talked about this incredible love story, the historical tragedy, and even how they made this spectacle. How do all those things come together to make Titanic something people are still thinking about almost 30 years later? Why are we even talking about this movie from 1997?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? And I think the source material actually gives us some clues. First of all, it became this huge cultural phenomenon. I mean, we're talking record-breaking box office. Over $2 billion globally and 11 Oscars.
Those are some big numbers. You couldn't escape it back then. It was everywhere.
Everywhere. It made Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet into these huge stars. I mean, their careers were never the same after this movie.
Our learner listeners are definitely going to be interested in how one movie can do that, how it can totally change an actor's career.
For sure. And we can't forget about the music. My Heart Will Go On. I mean, that became an instant classic, just as iconic as the movie, right? Up
Yeah.
there with the most famous movie soundtracks ever.
So what's the final word? Is Titanic the best love story of all time? Is it a spectacle that changed what you could do on screen? Or is it both?
See, that's what's so great about this movie. It works on all these different levels.
Yeah.
It really shows you how powerful a good story can be, how a movie can stay with you long after you've seen it.
That's a great point. So to all our listeners out there, what about you? Which part of the movie stood out to you? Was it Jack and Rose's love story? Was it how huge the disaster was? Here's one last thing to think about. The source material mentions that Titanic had a huge impact on other filmmakers. So what are some movies you can think of that Titanic might have influenced? What movies have some of its DNA? Think about that, and we'll see you next time. Happy watching.